So in here, in the auth context, we need to go ahead and import a couple of things. So the first thing that we're going to be importing is the React create content. Okay, but what I want you to do firstly, just open up a parenthesis like this, and over here just say from. Then you need to pass in React. So I'm just gonna say from React. Okay, so this is pretty much what we need to do. Then in here, let's go ahead and start importing a couple of things. So let's start with create context. That's the first thing that we're going to be needing. Let's also import the use state. So I'm going to import use state and use effect. So if you're familiar with React, then you're going to know that these are called hooks. So this is pretty much what we're going to be using to, make our application live and running. Now, the another thing that we need to import is the JWT, the code. So remember we installed something called JWT. So we need to go ahead and say import JWT underscore the code. You can name down whatever you want, but from, then I think it's from JWT dash the code. This is an issue. This is supposed to be import. I guess I'm kind of used to Django now, so I'm still saying from the normal way of importing things from Django. So yeah, JWT the code, and that's it. And finally, let's go ahead and import. I think that should be use history. And this should be in a curly bracket. So we're gonna say import use history. This should be from React router DOM. Okay, so that's pretty much everything we need to do. Now let's go ahead and instantiate the create context hook that we imported over here so that we can be using it anywhere that we want. So I'm just going to define a variable, and you can call this variable whatever you want, but I'm just going to call mine auth context. Okay, so I'm going to call mine auth context, and I'm going to say this auth context should be equal to use not use instead, but instead create context that we imported above. So create context, and we need to go ahead and initialize it. So you initialize it like this. Now we have this variable auth context, so we can go ahead and use this auth context wherever we want instead of always calling the create context. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do, firstly, let's go ahead and export this auth context that we just created. So if we export this auth context that we just created, that means we can access it from any other application or file over here. So as you can see, we're in this one context, auth context. That means we can access the auth context in the app, in the index, and generally it would become global in our application. So I'm also going to say const, that should be const and export. So okay, instead of export, I think that should be default, const default auth context. You know what, we're gonna export this. Okay, so we need to go ahead and say export default, and what do we want to export? We want to export the auth context, as simple as that. Now that's pretty much what you want to do. Now let's go ahead and start working with some things that we want to do. So I'm gonna start by writing export, and we're gonna create a const, and let's call this one auth provider. So I'm gonna be explaining things that so you guys follow along with everything that's going on. Now, why did we firstly put the export const auth provider? So initially we want to go ahead and create a new function auth provider like this, and there is a lot of ways to do this. You can export this after you finish creating below, or you could just go ahead and simply pass in the export over here to immediately export it as we are creating. Okay, but don't worry, you're still gonna understand all this. So I'm gonna pass in a prop over here, and I'm gonna call it children. Okay, property children, or we call it a parameter. So what I simply want to do is pass in this arrow, and I'm going to go ahead and open this up. So this is an arrow function. Now we've successfully created it, but one thing that you want to remove is this. You want to pass an equal to. So this over here now is pretty much creating a new arrow function for us. Don't worry, I'm going to explain all this and what's going on behind the scenes. So yeah, let's get started. Now the first thing that I'm going to do is create a const, and for this one, hopefully you already know how use state works. We can set things to the state, and when we put const, we can now pass in whatever variable that we want to set into it. So firstly, I'm going to call this one auth token. You can call it auth tokens. Then I'm going to set auth token, set auth tokens, just like this. So this one over here is going to be the variable. This one is going to be the actual value or the actual variable that we're going to be using to, change up whatever that's in the state. So take note, you can call this whatever you want. You can call this one banana, and you can call this one milkshake. It's up to you. Okay, so we call this banana and call this milkshake. It's totally up to you, but we want to stick with more professional names. That's why I gave it auth tokens and set auth tokens. And you want to make sure that this is in a list or in an array, which means it's in the square bracket. And after that, we call the use state just like this. We initialize it, and in here we're just going to go ahead and create a direct function. So we don't want to run this then come down and start creating a function, but instead we want to automatically create a function like this and write things in here. Okay, so what do we want to do in here? Follow along. The first thing that we're going to do is say local storage.get item. So what does this mean? Firstly, we're going to go ahead and get the item auth token. Don't worry, we haven't set it yet. I'm going to show you guys. So we get item auth tokens. So hopefully, if you are already experienced, or let's say you have a little knowledge about JavaScript, then you're gonna know what this means. This pretty much means that there is a local storage attribute called auth token that have been set already. Then the get item method over here will simply go ahead and bring it, or the function. It will simply go ahead, query the local storage and grab whatever key that's named auth token. Then it's gonna grab the value that's in there. You can also set this to a variable, but for now we don't need the variable. We're gonna do some later. So what we want to do is quite easy. So firstly, we want to see something. If this local storage actually exists, then we want to get it. But if it doesn't exist, we want to set it to null. So how do we do this? Just in here, I'm gonna put a question mark, and I'm gonna say json.parse. So now, I don't know if you know what json.parse means, but don't worry, I'm gonna explain what it means. So we're gonna say local storage.get item, and what item do we want to get? It's gonna be called auth tokens. So I'm just gonna copy the auth tokens and paste it in there. But what if it doesn't exist? The local storage auth token attribute doesn't exist. What do we want to do? Let's just go ahead and set it to null. As simple as that. So what does this mean? So this json.parse is pretty much going to convert the JSON data that we're getting into objects. But if for any reason this was stringify, then what it's going to do is it's going to go ahead and convert the JavaScript object into JSON. Hopefully you understand. And I'm going to be putting comments so you guys can actually follow along with everything that's going on. So after we've done that, that's the first thing that we want to do. Let's just get down here and say const. Now we're going to create a new state. I'm going to say const user, and let's also say set user. So we also instantiate the use state. And should we go ahead and okay, I think let's just go ahead and create the function right from here. Okay, so now just like we've done over here, I'm going to go ahead and copy this and paste down here. So just copy the local storage get item auth token and paste down there. So just like what we've done before, we want to also check for something. Now instead of just checking for the JSON.parse and converting it to JavaScript object, this time around we want to go ahead and decode the token. So hopefully you already know what the token gets. Remember when I copied one of the refresh token and pasted it in jwt.io, and we got all the user information back. So that's what we simply want to do now. We want to go ahead and check if there's actually a token like that in the local storage. Then we want to go ahead and do jwt underscore code, or that's supposed to be the code, not code, but just like I told you, you could call it whatever you want, but I want to stick with the naming so we don't have any issue. So as you can see, jwt decode. What do we want to decode? We want to decode local storage dot get item. And what is the item called? Okay, I think that's supposed to be in a parenthesis. And what is the item called? Auth token. So understand what this line is doing over here. This line is pretty much gonna check if we have this auth token in the local storage, then decode it. And when we say decode, we mean go ahead and get all the data that's in the local storage token, or in this auth token, which means it's going to get the user ID, the email address, and other kind of stuff that's stored in that token. Hopefully you understand. That's pretty much what this line over here does. JWT decode is the one that's going to decode the token and return the user ID, the email, and all that kind of stuff. And what if this token does not exist? As usual, the best thing to do is just set it to null. Okay, so after that, the next thing that we want to do is just go ahead and we could use this, we could not use it, it's totally up to you, but I'm just gonna create a loading, and I'm gonna say set loading. So while we're trying to log in a user, we can just turn this to loading, something like that. And when the user is logged in, like turn the button to let's say something like signing in. and make the button, disabled, so the user is not going to be able to click on it multiple times when they're trying to log in. Okay, so when we've done that, let's go ahead and say use state should be what? True. So that means immediately the loading is called, we automatically set the loading to be true. Then we can go ahead and set it to false manually when we have something to do with it. Okay, so hopefully you are still following along, but if there is, for any reason, you're not understanding something, drop it in the comment section and I'll be there to help you out. Okay, I'll try my possible best to help you out. So we want to go ahead and create another one. So I'm going to create a history. What I just want to do is instantiate the use history that we imported above. So what the history is going to help us do is it's going to help us, push to a page. I think that should be the right word to use. I don't know if you're gonna understand the word push. Let me just say it's gonna help redirect to a page. So after a user logs in, what do we want to do? We obviously want to redirect them to a page, right? So that's what this is gonna be helping us do. We're gonna say something like history.push homepage after a user logs in and all that. Don't worry, you're gonna understand better when we start implementing all this. So the next thing that we want to do now is go ahead and create a function that's going to log a user in. So I'm going to say const and let's call it login user. I think that's the best thing we could come up with. And we can go ahead and just pass in the username and the password. So whenever a user wants to log in, what do we give them? We give them the username and the password, right? But in my case, I think that's not the best thing to do because a user is trying to log in with their email, right? And also their password. So instead of giving them the username and password, how about we go ahead and give them the email and the password? So understand what's going on here. In the future, we're going to call this login user function. And whenever there is a parameter in a function, if that function gets called, let's say in the future we are now working on the login page and we call this login user, that means a user is supposed to pass in their email, desphixs@gmail.com, and their password testing321. So the first one, email, is going to be here. The second one, password, is going to be here. So in the future, we're going to call it like this. That's why we pass in the email and the password. If this is interchanged, that means the email should be here and the testing user should be here. Take notes, the ordering actually also matters. Okay, so when we've done that, since we're gonna be calling an API, because in this one we're gonna be calling the backend API. One thing that we'd want to do is go ahead and pass in async. Okay, so we want to pass in async because we're going to be calling an API just like I've told you. And after that, let's go ahead and instantiate the function. So this is an arrow function. Hopefully you already know that. And let's go ahead and define a new variable. I'm going to call this one response, and let's just pass in await. And we're going to be using the JavaScript good old fetch method. Okay, that calls an API. Now in here, what we need to pass is the API route, something like the login API and all that. Don't worry, let's go ahead and run our server so we understand what's going on. I'm going to come over here. I'm going to put this side by side and let's see into the back end. And I'm going to run Python manage.py. I'm going to run server. Okay, we give this some time. As you can see, my server is running. Now let's get back to my site over here and let's try logging into the admin. So this is my admin. I'm going to go ahead and log in with my username and password. And there you go. I'm logged in. So right now, if I visit my home page, then I should just see all this over here. So now if I visit /API, I just want to visit /API, then API/ just like this. Then as you can see, we have all this. So token is the one that's going to help us obtain a token to login. So if I come over here to this API/token, just like this, and refresh, okay, I think we're having an issue. Let's just clear out this register thing. We don't need that. So there you go. API token is the one that's going to help us log in. So whenever we put in our email address and our password, this is going to go ahead and give a token. As you can see, it gives a refresh and an access token. So that means this over here, this route is the one that's going to help us, log in user. So what you want to do is go ahead and copy this, as simple as that, and you want to paste it in here because we're trying to call the API that helps us, log in. That's what we're going to do. When we want to work with the register, we also got to do the same thing. So yeah, that's it. You want to add a comma over here and open up curly brackets. So hopefully you are seeing. If you're not seeing, I'm going to go ahead and zoom this in, or that looks too big. I think this should be enough. So I'm going to break this apart. Then in here, let's set the method that we want to use. So hopefully, if we've been working with a lot of HTML in my tutorial, I have over 240 videos if I'm not mistaken, and in each and every one of them we work with Django HTML, Django HTML, Django HTML, and in each of the HTML I'm sure we must have worked with forms, CSRF token, if you still remember, and we always passing a method in the form. So whenever we have a form, I'm not sure we can create a form like that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come down here, I'm going to create something like this. So whenever there is a form, there used to be an action, right? So now let's say the action is this word over here. Take note of that. The action, what is supposed to be in here in the action is this one that we passed in here. So this is a native HTML form, and the method, hopefully whenever we try and log in or do something like that, the method is always post. So the action is this one, the method post is this one that we created over here. And aside the method post, there is one more thing that HTML, not HTML rather, but instead React would also always want to take, and that would be a content type. Or instead, let's just say that's going to be a header. Yeah, it would want to take in headers. So for the headers, you can pass in a lot of things for the header, but one of the most native thing I would say that you'd want to pass in is the content type. So what is the kind of data that we want to be sending or that we're going to be receiving from this API instead? And that's going to be a JSON data. So for a JSON data, I'm pretty much going to go ahead and pass in application slash JSON. So JSON data, that's pretty much what we want to do. As you can see, this is still working fine. Our server is working fine. There are no issues. So yeah, that's it. Let's go ahead and pass in some things to the body. So in a form, in a HTML form, you know that whenever we finish passing in the action, the URL, the CSRF token, and all that kind of stuff, then we're going to go ahead and pass in the input fields, right? So in the input field, when we grab the data from the input field and send it back to Django when the user click on the submit button. So how do we pass in the data now? So to do that, we're going to use body just like that. And remember when I told you that if we say JSON.stringify, take note, if we say JSON.stringify, that means we are trying to convert basic, or let's say regular JavaScript object into JSON, because this over here, this API accepts only JSON data. And as you can see, we are obviously even telling this function that we are writing, or this method, that hey, it accepts only the type of application JSON. There's going to be an issue over here if we run this, because this is supposed to be content type, not context type. So yeah, it's telling it that hey, we are passing in a JSON data, so we need to go ahead and convert the username and the password that the user is going to be setting, or that the user is going to be putting in the input field. We need to convert it into what? JSON data. As simple as that. So let's go ahead and pass in the email, and also what we want to pass in. We can pass in the password alongside us and the password. Okay, you can put this on separate lines if you want, but I think this should be okay. So after we've done that, just below the const, as you can see the const over here, just below the const, let's create a new const or a new variable. We're going to call it data. And this one, we're going to say await, and let's pass in the response.json. So what is this going to do? Let me explain. Hopefully I've explained what this are doing. Now, not date, but data. Okay. So what this is going to do is, hopefully you know that we have this with this variable response that's assigned to all this over here. So guys, whenever this API or this function gets executed, we grab everything and store it to this variable response. Now what we simply did now is say grab response, then the JSON data. So hopefully you know that over here we passed everything to this API as JSON by doing JSON.stringify, and over here even telling it that we are passing in everything as application JSON. Then that means if we want to get it back, we need to call this JSON method over here. Hopefully you are understanding. So to get it back, we call response, which is this one over here, the JSON method, and every other thing that we're going to be getting back, we pass it into the data. So you can go ahead and even console log this data. You can go ahead and log this data. Don't worry, we're going to be seeing it when we start working, so you know that oh yeah, that's the data, everything that the user passed into the form, we're actually getting it, and we console logged it. Okay, for now I know you're not going to be seeing any physical thing showing up on the side, but it's totally okay. I just want you to understand the code, and if you can follow along with everything that's going on, then you should be on the right path. So after we've done this, we need to write a conditional statement to do something. So let's say if the response.status, So whenever we return, okay, this is supposed to be status. So whenever we call an API like this, we send data to the API, it always returns a status with it. And the status are something like this, 200. So 200 pretty much means that everything went well, or we can use 201. So 201 means that it was created. But right now we're not trying to create anything. We're trying to log in. So what we just need to check is if it actually went well. Now, how do we know that, or how do we get this over here? Take a close look. When a user come over here, put in their email and their password, and let's say we're trying to put in an email that doesn't exist, then we're gonna see no active account found for this. But if we put in this and hit post, now if we come over here, what do you notice? We have to take a close look at the terminal over here. Then as you can see, we have 200. As you can see, that means everything actually went well. When we got 401, which is forbidden, I think, when we got 401, that means there was no user. Let me try running this again so we see what that was. Okay, as you can see, unauthorized. 401 is unauthorized, so there is no user, so they couldn't log in. And as you can see, that's why it showed 401. So when it shows 200, that means everything is actually working perfectly well.